Disclaimer. This channel is ran solely by a disabled person who has a speech impairment. A speech impairment is not a sign of an intellectual disability. It is a sign of physical disability. I have manually added subtitles for those who are not accustomed to my speech. If you stick around, I guarantee you will become accustomed to my speech. This channel is always a work in progress. Mistakes will happen. I will try my best to limit them, though. Finally, this channel will feature a lot of true crime content. Viewer discretion is advised.
Debbie Leitch never had a chance to cry for help, silenced by a world that too often ignores disabled voices. Her suffering was hidden behind a curtain of deception, indifference, and systematic failures. The tragedy of Debbie's death is not just a story of one young woman with Down syndrome. It is an indictment of a society that looks the other way when the most vulnerable are in danger. Her mother didn't simply fail her. She watched her waste away, day after day, and chose to do nothing. This wasn't neglect or manslaughter. It was murder in slow motion. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here. Today I'm going to bring in the true crime case of Debbie Leitch. But before I do that, I wanted to give a quick personal update. If you're not interested in the channel update, please go to the timestamp on the screen or watch the timer on the screen. Okay, here's my update. I took a break from making YouTube videos. I did this because I wanted to learn how to make quality videos. I spent about 2 years learning the video editing process, and now I'm ready to put that learning into action. So I'm going to start making videos more consistently. I'm also pivoting my channel to be more of a true crime channel that covers cases involving people with disabilities. Thank you for your attention. Here's the video. So let's get started. I think I need to get a little smaller so you can see the memorial candle in the background. There! That's better. Now let's get started. Murder in Plain Sight. The death of Debbie Leitch and a system that failed her. What happened to Debbie? Debbie Leitch was a 24-year-old woman with Down syndrome living in Blackpool, England, under the care of her mother, Elaine Clarke. Once described as healthy and happy, Debbie's life deteriorated between 2016 and 2019. At the beginning of that period, Debbie weighed a healthy 64 kilograms. But by August, she barely weighed 24 kilograms. This wasn't a sudden decline. It was slow, prolonged, and visible if someone had truly looked. Elaine Clarke repeatedly lied to social services and healthcare professionals who visited the home. She would make excuses, postpone appointments, and paint a picture of her daughter being lovingly cared for. One healthcare worker reported seeing Debbie sunning herself in July 2019, apparently content. But this image was a false one. The home was a hellish environment, later described by authorities as barely habitable, filled with filth, mold, and rot. Debbie was suffering from advanced Norwegian scabies, an aggressive and painful form of the disease. Her skin was raw, cracked, and infected. Her body was covered in sores. She was malnourished and emaciated, visibly in distress, and surrounded by filth. On August 29, 2019, police were called to check on her welfare. When they arrived, they found Debbie already dead. She had likely been dead for between 8 and 36 hours. The post-mortem examination was harrowing. Debbie had starved to death. She had been left untreated for her agonizing skin condition. Her condition had declined so drastically that it was impossible not to see the signs unless one chose to ignore them. Elaine Clarke did more than ignore them. She actively concealed them. In 2022, Clarke was convicted of gross negligent manslaughter and sentenced to 9 years and 7 months in prison. Why manslaughter wasn't enough? Hi, editing Chelsea here. Before we get into this section, I just wanted to say that I understand how the plea deal process works, and I understand Elaine Clarke pled guilty to manslaughter probably because the prosecutor didn't think they could get a conviction for murder. I understand that, but the point is she should have been charged with murder. So just keep that in mind when you listen to this section. The legal classification of Debbie's death as a manslaughter to many was a gross understatement of the crime. Manslaughter implies recklessness or carelessness, not intent. But intent isn't always a sudden act of violence or overt malice. Sometimes intent is long-term. Elaine Clarke made a choice every single day to let her daughter suffer. I'll repeat that. Elaine Clarke made the choice every single day to let her daughter suffer. She had food in the house. She had access to help. Clarke didn't destroy Debbie in a moment of rage. She did something worse. She slowly killed her over time with premeditated disregard for her life. In any other context, say a child locked in a room, starved, untreated for infection, and left to die, this would be easily considered murder. Why then, when the victim is disabled, does the legal system seem more lenient? We must ask ourselves if ableism has found its way in our courtrooms. The disabled deserve close protection under the law. Debbie did not get that. Systemic failures in the cause of complacency. Elaine Clarke's crime couldn't have happened in isolation. Debbie had been known to the social service system for years. Health professionals visited her home. There were opportunities to intervene, but none were taken. Clarke knew how to manipulate the system. He lied about Debbie's condition, staged clean areas of the home for inspection, and offered plausible excuses. This doesn't solve those tasks with Debbie's safety. Why not insist on seeing Debbie's full living face? Why were the visits not unannounced and more thorough? Why was one glimpse of Debbie on the couch enough to dismiss deeper concerns? This is where systemic ableism comes into play. Society often assumes the disabled are dependent, passive, or invisible. When concerns are raised about their well-being, these concerns are too often minimized. Authorities frequently take the word of the caregiver at face value, even when those caregivers have every incentive to lie. There is an assumption that the presence of a parent equals the presence of love and care. That assumption killed Debbie. Social workers and healthcare professionals are overworked and underfunded. But the system failed because it allowed assumptions to override evidence. A vibrant young woman lost nearly 2/3 of her body weight. Her skin was visibly damaged. Her home was filled with rot. No amount of manipulation could fully hide the fact. But people accepted these lies because they didn't look closely enough. This is what made Debbie's case all the more painful. She could have been saved. A call to action. Debbie Leitch's death must be a wake-up call. We cannot let another disabled person die this way. To prevent this tragedy from happening again, we must address legal and systematic shortcomings. I've come up with 6 action steps that I think could be taken. 1. Reform the law. The legal system must acknowledge that long-term neglect can be just as deadly and deliberate as a single act of violence. Prosecutors must consider murder charges when there is a clear, sustained disregard for human life, especially when the caregiver has full awareness of the suffering they caused. 2. Improve oversight and enforcement. Social services must conduct thorough, unannounced visits, especially in cases with vulnerable adults. Checklists and appearances are not enough. Authorities should be trained to recognize deception and manipulation and respond with urgency. 3. Mandatory training on disability and abuse. All healthcare and social service professionals should receive comprehensive training on the specific risks disabled individuals face, including familial abuse, medical neglect, and institutionalized trauma. This includes recognizing that parents and caregivers can be perpetrators. 4. Listening to the disabled community. We must center voices of the disabled in conversations about policy, protection, and reform. No one understands the risk better than we do, those who live with them every day. Disabled advocates should be part of case reviews, policy development, 5. Establish a national registry for at-risk adults. A centralized database that flags vulnerable individuals who are subject to repeated concerns would ensure better follow-up and coordination between agencies. Debbie's case might have turned out differently if the red flags from multiple sources had been seen as part of a larger pattern. Create independent advocacy networks. Every disabled person should have access to an independent advocate, someone not tied to family or the state, who can monitor their well-being and report abuse. Advocates can provide a crucial outside perspective that counters caregiver manipulation. Final thoughts. Debbie Leitch deserves more. She deserves a society that cares enough to protect her, a system that acted before it was too late, and a legal outcome honoring the truth of what happened to her. Her death is not just a tragedy, it's a failure at every level, familial, societal, and institutional. But we still can honor Debbie. Not just with outrage, but with action. We can fight for legal reform, better safeguards, and a shift in the way society sees and supports disabled people. We owe it to her and the numerous others killed by caregiver violence. We owe it to every disabled person whose suffering has been ignored. Because the next Debbie Leitch is out there, and whether she lives or dies may depend on what we choose to do now. Well, that's my take on the Debbie Leitch case. I hope you found it informative. I'm not gonna say I hope you enjoyed it, because it's hard to enjoy a video like this. But I hope you found it educational and informative. I plan on covering other true crime cases about caregiver violence, and I hope to cover cases that aren't covered by other YouTube channels, because there are many cases of caregiver violence, and they don't all get covered like they should. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, you know what to do. Goodbye.